Hi, welcome to the Movie Bro channel. In this video we will summarize one of the Salvation films that was released in 2014. Spoiler ahead, watch out, and take care. The film begins by showing the atmosphere of the United States in 1871, where a man named John Jensen enters a train station with his brother named Peter Jensen. Where he participated in the German war against Denmark in 1864, now he will meet his wife and only son after 7 years apart. Not long after, the train finally arrived and a beautiful woman with a child descended through the door of the carriage. The woman is John's wife, Marie Jensen. As an older brother, Peter also feels happy to see John finally being able to reunite with his family again after so long. He then said goodbye to leave after confirming they met, and John himself took his wife and child in a horse-drawn carriage to their destination. When John and his wife and son got into the carriage, there was a husband and wife who were already in the carriage, then the two people greeted them. When the horse carriage they were riding was about to leave, suddenly two men opened the door and forced their way into the carriage. Without thinking about the norm of decency, one of the foreign men ordered the husband and wife to get off the carriage. Until finally the young couple relented, and were forced to follow the wishes of the stranger. And from this it is known that the two men are named Paul and Lester, the convicts who have just been released from prison. Along the way John began to feel annoyed, because he realized the disrespectful attitude of Paul, who deliberately looked at his wife. Even John's son Creston began to feel frightened by the behavior of the two men, as if knowing that their safety was being threatened. John, understanding his son's fear, began to chat with him, to distract him from the two men. But Creston's suspicions were finally proven, when Paul began to show an increasingly disrespectful attitude, by forcing Marie to drink the alcohol he was carrying. Marie, who initially tried to refuse, finally followed the man's wishes for fear that he would do something worse in the future. But the situation can no longer be accepted by John, when Paul boldly puts his hand into the skirt that Marie is wearing regardless of John's whereabouts. Getting this treatment made Marie very scared. But because he didn't want the situation to get worse, John tried to contain his anger. Unfortunately, the situation led to Lester suddenly pointing a gun at John, while Paul violently pulled Marie and started acting obscene to her. John could only resign himself to seeing all that happened, and finally he was thrown out of the train. John immediately got up and chased the train with all his might, until John arrived at an empty house. How shocked John was when he saw Creston, who was lying in the middle of the road, and he immediately approached to check on the condition of his son, who has now died with a gunshot wound to the head. John then carried Creston's body with a feeling of being hit, and continued his search to find Marie's whereabouts. He found a horse-drawn carriage that stopped in the middle of the forest, where the coachman also suffered the same fate as Creston. John slowly laid down his son's body, and at that very moment he heard Marie's groaning in pain. John, carrying a rifle as a weapon, slowly approaches the train, where he has to witness his wife being raped by one of the criminals. John immediately aimed his gun to shoot at one of the others, who was seen keeping watch outside the train. As soon as the bullet was released, the train immediately advanced and Lester was seen, who had died with a gunshot wound to his head. Knowing his partner had died, Paul immediately got out of the train and tried to escape into the forest. With difficulty the inmate crawls after receiving a gunshot wound to his leg, and eventually dies after being shot by John's gun. Having managed to avenge his son's death, John approaches the train and finds his wife also dead. John then carried the bodies of his wife and child onto the horse, and continued walking silently towards the house he shared with his brother. Meanwhile, Peter, who had arrived home, found John sitting in front of the corpses of his wife and child lying on the bed. Peter was so shocked by what was in front of his eyes that he couldn't even say anything to John. He could only comfort John in the loss of his family. The story then continues with the show of a town called Black Creek, where a powerful bandit gang leader named Delaroque Henry comes to the town after reports of the bodies of someone suspected of being his subordinates. The bandit chief's arrival was greeted by the mayor of Black Creek, Major Keene. Delaroque then ordered Major Keene to take him to see the body of the younger brother, much to the major's surprise, because previously he did not know that the body found was his young brother. When Delaroque saw the body of the younger brother, who was in a very pathetic condition, the townspeople then panicked for fear that Delaroque would vent his anger on them. Delaroque, who was immediately angry, threatened the city's law enforcement officer, Sheriff Malik, to immediately find the killer of his young brother and friend within 2 hours. If Malik failed to do so, Delaroque would take the lives of 2 civilians in retaliation for Paul's death. And if no decision is taken, then Delaroque will randomly kill 4 civilians. After 2 hours had passed, Sheriff Malik had yet to come up with an answer as to who had killed Paul. So by necessity, the sheriff's head then chose 2 civilians who would be sacrificed for the security of the city of Black Creek. The first person was a grandmother who had a grandson, whom the grandmother voluntarily sacrificed herself to be executed. While the second was a disabled man, he was chosen at the behest of Sheriff Malik and Major Keene. Without further ado, De La Rue shot dead the 2 selected townspeople, so that his actions made the other townspeople even more afraid. Not only that, De La Rue, who was still not satisfied with the deaths of the 2 people, actually shot another resident at random. After that, De La Rue announced a new rule that the citizens of Black Creek Town had to follow, where De La Rue will increase the security money, which was $80 per month, to $160 per month. De La Rue argued that the increase was for the safety of the residents, given that there had been murders in the city. Hearing De La Rue's statement, Sheriff Malik and Major Keene could only agree without putting up a fight. The story switches to John, who has buried the bodies of his wife and child, with the help of Peter. On the other hand, De La Rue and his men held Paul's funeral, which was also attended by the wife, named Madeline. On a different day, John and Peter decide to move to another city, where they finally enter the city of Black Creek to go see Major Keene. Their arrival was noticed by a married couple who had been riding in the same horse-drawn carriage with John, so they finally reported what had happened to Sheriff Malik at that time. John, who met with Major Keene, then discussed the sale of his land, which is yet to be sold. Major Keene then suggested that John wait for the land price increase, until De La Rue managed to find the killer of his brother. Considering that De La Rue had implemented a new regulation regarding tax increases, as long as his young brother killer was not found. John, who heard the suggestion, was naturally surprised, but at the same time he could guess that the person he had killed before was De La Rue's younger brother. John finally decides to sell his land to Keene at a low price, so he can quickly leave the city. After the sale and purchase of the land was completed, John exited the mayor's office and found Sheriff Malik's men preparing to arrest him. Despite his attempts to escape, the beleaguered John is finally caught by them and put in prison. While in detention, John finally realized that Peter was in prison, then pleaded with the sheriff to release his brother. Unfortunately, Sheriff Malik refuses his request and even blames John for getting his brother and the rest of the city into his troubles. Sheriff Malik also said that surrendering John to De La Rue would bring peace to the residents of Black Creek Township. He even likened himself to the shepherd, who sometimes had to sacrifice one sheep for the safety of the other sheep. Shortly thereafter, De La Rue's men take John to his base, and begin torturing and hanging him from a pole. De La Rue, who later came with Madeline, arrogantly insulted John as a criminal for killing his young brother. In front of Madeline, John then told the actions of Paul, who had killed John's son and raped his wife to death. Not accepting what John said, De La Rue became furious and immediately hit John in the face with all his strength. After that, John was left hanging on a pole in the scorching sun. From a distance, it looks like Major Keene is riding a horse towards him, apparently intending to take the money from the sale of the land, which is stored in John's shoes. While in prison, Peter is thinking about how to get out of that place in order to save his brother. He hatched a plan to outsmart the guards, and finally managed to get out of prison. When he arrived at De La Rue's base, Peter's skill as an ex-soldier could easily knock out the guards without causing a ruckus. Madeline witnessed the action of Peter, who saved John from behind the window, but strangely the woman just let them get away with it. Peter, who managed to bring John out of the base, was then intercepted by 2 De La Rue troops. He was forced to shoot them, so he could ride his horse with John and quickly flee from the place. The chase between De La Rue's group and them was unavoidable. John's weak condition made it difficult for him to control his horse, until he finally fell in the middle of the road. Feeling that John's condition does not allow him to escape, Peter then hides his brother behind a rock. Peter tries to distract De La Rue's group who are chasing them, but he is eventually caught and is certain to be killed. John, who woke up to the sound of De La Rue's gang of horses approaching, had to swallow the bitter truth when he saw his brother's body being dragged away by the gang. De La Rue and his men then returned to their base, to find that the troops who had been guarding there had been killed. De La Rue also checked into the house, where he found his cash box had been burglarized by someone. Finally, it is known the fact that the person who carried out all these actions was Madeline, who took advantage of the moment of De La Rue's pursuit at that time. It is also known that after De La Rue saved Madeline, whose tongue was cut off by the Indians, she was instead made a slave to satisfaction and must always fulfill De La Rue's desires. Madeline, who managed to take all of De La Rue's money, then set off on a train. But in the end she was caught by De La Rue's troops, and brought back to his base. On the other hand, John, who finally left his hiding place to seek help, then arrived at the house of Mrs. Whistler, the wife of the previous disabled man who was killed by De La Rue. Mrs. Whistler was kind enough to help John by providing food and shelter for him, even though she knew that John had indirectly caused her husband's death. That night John sneaks into Major Keene's residence, and points a gun at the old man. Here it is known that all this time Major Keene used De La Rue's power to deceive and extort citizens to sell his land at a very cheap price. John then forces Major Keene into a self-made coffin, and shoots him in the head right then and there. After that John went to a gun shop, which belonged to the grandmother who had previously been killed by De La Rue. He then bought all the equipment needed to help him settle his business with De La Rue. Knowing John's goal of wanting to kill De La Rue and his men, the shop owner then offered himself to join John against Delori's troops. But the offer was rejected by John, who finally left the gun shop without speaking. In the afternoon, a carriage on a horse without a coachman brought a coffin to De La Rue's headquarters, which contained the body of Major Keene, who had died with a gunshot wound to his head, as a first gift for De La Rue. Then followed by burning in front of the headquarters area, thus attracting the attention of the bandits to approach. It turned out that in that place there was already a gun shop owner who exchanged fire with De La Rue's troops, with the aim of distracting them and ignoring the guarding of the base. John is finally able to sneak into the interior of the base, and together with his new comrades begin to brutally attack them. One of De La Rue's men, who was guarding Madeline, noticed the shop owner was ready to shoot on the roof of the headquarters. Then the bandit shot him until he died instantly. The shot also accidentally hit a petrol-filled Molotov cocktail previously brought by the young man, until it finally hit his cigarette and started to burn the whole room. De La Rue's men finally made it out of the burning room, forcing Madeline through the window. John, who saw them from a distance, then shot the man from a distance to death. John continues to infiltrate the base, and kills the remaining De La Rue's men one by one. Delori, who was now left alone, sneakily walked up behind John and shot him right in the left hand. De La Rue, who was slowly approaching John, was already preparing to shoot him in the head. But unexpectedly, Madeline got behind him and shot De La Rue twice in the chest.
Be sure as hell.
John immediately took the opportunity to get up, and ended the vicious Delori's life with a shot to the head. After witnessing the death of the person who had made her suffer, Madeline then left De La Rue's corpse. A few hours later, Sheriff Malik and his men visit De La Rue's headquarters, and begin to lie by praising John's ability to clear up De La Rue's gang. When Madeline appears in the middle of their conversation, John then threatens the sheriff to get out of town immediately. John told Sheriff Malik that his existence as law enforcement meant nothing, and her lies to John, solely to cover her incompetence and cowardice. The film finally ends with John leaving with Madeline, leaving the dark city for a new place.